Rapid fire questions to get us
eased
into the chat. So I might need to put my glasses on.
First of all, I'm delighted that you spelled my name right, because I've lived my life with my name being spelled EY. And of course AY is the Scottish way of spelling it, of which I'm proud. So thank you for that.
Wow, it was a pleasure. We do try to look after our guests and give them all the credit that they're due. So, would you rather drink Iron Brew or Coke?
Iron Brew.
Hey! Scotland is the only country in the world where Iron Brew is the country's #1 drink. So
it's a perfect hangover cure as well.
With a vodka in it as well. Okay, so Facebook or Twitter?
Neither.
Ooh. Okay. Football or rugby?
Well, rugby.
Oh, awesome. Haggis or meatloaf?
Haggis.
Hey. Status Quo or Fleetwood Mac?
Oh, Fleetwood Mac.
Oh, very good. So there we go. Interesting.
Did I pass? Can I stay?
Well, I think the great thing is you do have some Scottish roots.
I have very deep Scottish roots.
Uh-huh.
I was born here in Edinburgh and grew up in Edinburgh and went to school in Edinburgh. Went to the Royal High School when it was still up on Regent Terrace.
Wow.
I went to Edinburgh University and did an engineering degree. Went to work for Hewlett Packard when they were in South Queensferry. That was my first job.
Huh.
So, and what's left of my family is still here, and it's a big draw for me to come back here every year.
Wow.
Multiple times per year, actually. Yeah.
So we'll maybe have you visit us again in the future.
It all depends.
Don't mean to put you under pressure, but hopefully it'll be a positive experience.
Oh, I'm sure it will be. Yeah. I'm very happy to meet all of you. I think the startup entrepreneurial thing is a very good thing, and I'm a fan. So.
And so maybe you can tell us how you started in electrical engineering and electronic engineering at Edinburgh?
Yes.
And what was your job at Hewlett Packard?
Well, I started right out of university, so it was anything they wanted me to do, but it was an electrical engineering job. And at that time, I won't give you the exact date because it's a bit of a giveaway in terms of my age, but at that time, it was a really interesting time in technology because Intel had just developed the first microprocessor. It was a 4-bit microprocessor, and everybody was going nuts over this thing, trying to figure out what they could do. So that was happening at the time, and it primarily been all engineers were hardware engineers. In fact, some of them were putting power cables up, things like that, but it was all hardware engineering. And so this 4-bit microprocessor changed all of that, and it became software. And that was a big catalyst for what was going on at that time.
And so then, is that what you studied at university, or is that what you got to play with?
That's what I got to play with. And then I got into HP wanted to do more work in integrated circuits. And so I had an opportunity to get into that, and they sent me over to the US to learn from what they were doing in the US in terms of integrated circuits at that time, and to bring that back here and set up a lab in Queensferry to make chips, basically. Oh. Not fish and chip, but chips. And so I did all that, and it was really a cool thing. And we made some integrated circuits. Way back, when that was kind of a way out thing. And through that process, I was recruited by the folks in the US to go over there. And so I worked for Hewlett Packard in the US.
In America.
Yeah.
And where were you based then?
In Cupertino, in what is now the heart of Silicon Valley. Yeah.
And what was Silicon Valley like in those days?
Orchards. It was amazing. I got there and it was like going on vacation. The weather was perfect, everything was calm, and people were polite. And in between HP and Fairchild and Intel and these early startup companies were these beautiful orchards, and and the freeways were quiet, and everybody lived in these nice houses that had, orange trees in their garden and all that kind of stuff. And of course now it's like completely, now it's crazy. I used to think drivers in New York and Boston were crazy, but now California takes it. It's really a busy, crowded, expensive. All the archers are gone and been replaced by all these companies that you're very familiar with.
And so you were working for HP in Cupertino.
Yeah.
And how did that go? How long did you work for them?
A total of about 8 or 9 years. Okay. And then I got an opportunity to do my first startup.
Oh.
And so back in the mid-'80s, early to mid-'80s was my first sort of entrepreneurial experience. And it's with a company called Convergent Technologies. I doubt any of you have ever heard of Convergent Technologies, but it actually was a very successful company. It went public, and their goal was to make a business-oriented, at that time we called workstation, which is a familiar term now, but at that time it was not, and it was all about the same time as IBM came out with the first PC. And we were doing something equivalent to that, but really for business kinds of applications. And it was hot stuff. We had to develop our own operating system. We had to develop our own word processor because there wasn't one. We had to develop our own spreadsheet, everything from the ground up. And we did all that, and it sold a lot of these workstations. And it was my first experience of a company going public. Which is always for a startup, it's kind of one of the big things. If you can get to that place where, you can have a public offering on the open market.
How long did that take?
It took about 3 or 4 years.
Wow.
To get there. The company eventually, I left after about 5 or 6 years. The company eventually got sold and did well. But the experience for me was a really interesting one because I went from a Hewlett-Packard environment, which is very, Hewlett-Packard was considered one of the best companies around. Great benefits, fabulous work environment, beautiful cafeteria, and profit sharing, and all these things that were real innovations in that time, to this shed, this place that was actually a converted medical clinic. And I always remember that because the office I had used to be the X-ray department, and it had a lead-lined door, and we'd never slam this door because the whole building would come down, So we always had to be very careful about this, and so it was a very Spartan environment, working 24 hours a day, no private life whatsoever, travel on a whim, and that was my shock entry into the world of startups, and I loved every minute of it. It was fabulous, but not sustainable.
No,
which is I think is an important point. I've seen a lot of companies that are like that, where people are so enthusiastic and so passionate and wrapped up in what they're doing that they do work 24 hours a day and they burn out, and they're not thinking about what kind of company do I want to have, how do I want to treat employees. What kind of work-life balance do you want to have? And those things were never on the table at that time, and it ultimately led to a lot of people leaving and burning out and trying to do different things. But it was very exciting, and it was a fun thing.
And what was your role in the company?
I started off as basically an engineer. And ended up running their workstation business. So I became an executive, general manager, and all that stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
And after you left that company, is that when you formed TiVo, or was there a bit of a journey in between?
At that time, I left, and I thought this startup thing is really cool. I like this, so I'm going to do mine. I'm going to do one of my own. And I had an idea, which I then, because one of the things that's a benefit of being in a startup is even if you're at a relatively junior level, you get to know the investors because they're very visible. There's not a lot of layers between you and the people who actually fund the company. And so I knew some people on Sand Hill Road. You know, Sand Hill Road is this mile-long road in Menlo Park that that has all of the investors, all of the major. They're all in one very big long. There's like $1 trillion worth of investment in that one road. So I knew some of the people there, and I go on, I pitch my idea, and I get thrown out as usual, which you have to expect. But one of them said, I'm not sure I like your idea, but there's this other company that's looking for an engineering director that you might be interested in. And it turned out to be Silicon Graphics. And at the time, they had maybe, 100 employees. They had a product out. Jim Clark was the chairman. I didn't even know who they were, so I went along one night and I met with them. And Jim, they had a little demo room, and Jim, I don't know, are you guys familiar with what Silicon Graphics did? Yeah, they did these 3D workstations that were, at the time, were just, flight simulators, and they'd simulate everything. It was really exciting stuff. And I spent 3 hours with him in this demo room, and he showed me what these machines could do, and that was it. I was sold hook, line, and sinker. So I went there. They had not gone public yet. They were a small company, and built up some teams there. Ended up running the workstation business at Silicon Graphics. I was the executive vice president. They went public. Went through all of that, and to me, actually, it was both exciting from the standpoint of a hot company that was doing something really innovative and really exciting and really valuable for people. I mean, it was an important tool to a company that cared about its employees. A lot of the founders of Silicon Graphics came from HP. They brought their standards with them, their ethical standards with them, and I really valued that. And it taught me a huge amount about if you're going to do your own company, how to do it properly, right? And a lot of my friends today came from that era. Still friends with them. In fact, I'm here for a few days, and we're going off to Mallorca on a hiking trip, and my ex-boss from Silicon Graphics is coming along. So, we've still got that deep friendship from there. That was probably, other than TiVo, it was probably the most exciting time I had, just because it was so much fun and so challenging technically. And the customers were so interesting. As an executive, we were given accounts to sort of oversee and manage, as you get this kind of account, you get account. And my two accounts were Boeing and Disney, right? So what two different companies can you imagine there? So I go to Boeing, and they were using Silicon Graphics computers to, at that time, develop the 777. So I got to see how they did all that, which was really cool. And then they'd let you fly the flight simulators and that kind of thing. And then I go down to Disney, and they were building virtual reality rides for Disneyland, that you could ride on, and we had got involved in that. So that was sort of the kind of experience I was having while I was there, which was great.
Living the dream.
It was really cool. Yeah, it was
great. Was there no challenging or stressful times?
I would say 99% of the time it was crazy stressful. But if you love what you do and you believe in what you're doing, and you love working with the people that surround you, which is probably the most important thing, then you can get through that. You can have fun with it. It's energizing, right? I mean, there's different kinds of stress. There's stress that grinds you down, and there's stress that says, "This is exciting. I got to do more, and give me more of it." And that was definitely that idea.
Wow. So when did you have the spark of inventing or coming up with TiVo?
Well, there was probably, I don't know, I was thinking about it earlier. There's probably a 20-year period in my career, the first 10 of which was at SGI, where I wanted to do my own company. And then there was another 10 years after that when I actually did it. Okay? So it was a process that went over a long period of time. And I knew that if I was going to do that, it had to be for the long haul. I mean, there's a lot of companies that start up with the idea of, well, you know, we'll sell it in a couple of years. You know, we'll flip it and get on to the next one. My idea was something much longer term. And the key thing for me was it had to be an original thought. It had to be an invention, right? I didn't want to start a company that was somebody else's idea or was a continuation of another company that had maybe not been so successful when we moved forward. It had to be an original idea. And between myself and my co-founder, Jim Barton, we cooked up this notion of everybody hates TV. You know, everybody hates commercials, and yet TV is sort of interesting. Can we solve that problem? And so we thought it up. Everyone said, "How did you think it up?" Well, I wasn't in the shower. It wasn't like, you know, after 8 pints of beer. It was just it was something that we felt was a problem that needed to be solved, and that the cable companies and the broadcasters and the whole media industry, particularly in the US, was sort of screwing everybody because all you got were commercials, and it was destroying the entertainment experience, and we wanted to give people more control over that. And so we developed a 25-page PowerPoint presentation, and we peddled it around Sand Hill Road, and some crazy VCs picked up on it and gave us some money.
So how many VCs did you talk to before you met the crazy ones?
Well, we knew several of them. We probably, I don't know, but maybe half a dozen. Not a huge number. We knew several of them, and some of them were our old pals from Silicon Graphics, who had moved on. You know, when they left, they went to Sand Hill Road and became venture capitalists, right? That's a sort of a natural progression for a lot of people. So we knew them, and there were some people that we didn't know, and they said, "Oh God, you know, I've been waiting forever for somebody to do this." So they gave us money, and we ended up with two major venture capitalists who put money in the company, and we did an A round immediately. And at that time, you know, these days it's different. If you want to have a company, if you want to get funded for a company today, you sort of have to have the product. You know, it has to be there. You have to show it to them. Its value has to be very evident. Back in the mid to late 90s, the environment was very different. You could say, "I've got this idea. I've got this problem I want to solve. I've got some smart people that want to do it. Give us some money." And they go, "Great." And so it was not that hard, frankly, to do that. And it was, you know, we went from one funding to another. The interesting thing about funding for that thing, though, was that we got a modest amount of money from venture capitalists, and we got the product to a place where it started to become noticed in the marketplace, particularly with media companies. And you know, we built a prototype of this thing that would pause live TV. You're all familiar with TiVo, yeah. So we built a prototype of this thing that would pause live TV, and it had a nice user interface, and we could record programs. And it was built on a PC, and we put in a little box with a handle, right? And we peddled this around. I thought it'd be a good idea to tell the media companies what we were doing, despite the consequences, right? And so we went down to LA, we went to New York, and we peddled it around HBO and Showtime and NBC and ABC and all these companies. And we took a little box and we said, plugged it into their TV, hit the remote, and showed them. And he said, "Look, you can pause live TV, you can skip commercials." And the first reaction we got was, "Please leave." Right now. If you don't leave right now, we're going to get the security people to escort you out of the building. You guys are evil. You're going to destroy our business. We hate you. Don't ever come back again, right? So for a group of people that had grown up in Silicon Valley in this nice, you know, supportive HP Silicon Graphics environment, we were kind of shocked by this. But I suppose when we reflected on it, we realized we're onto something. You know, we're onto something really interesting. And so we did that for several months, and a really weird thing happened, because all these same companies came back to us and said, we want to invest, right? They wanted a seat at the table. They wanted to be able to know what was going on. So NBC invested, Discovery Channel invested, HBO invested, and we raised over $100 million from all those companies that purported to have hated us and actually physically threw us out of their office. And that was the catalyst for us to move forward with an even bigger investment and eventually go public and fund the company to what became around $500 million in total funding.
Wow.
A lot of which came from private private companies and not from the venture capitalists. So you talked earlier about, was that stressful? And it was the most wild, crazy time ever. And the only thing we could say to ourselves is don't take it too seriously, because we could have easily been destroyed by that. But
so have you seen the series Silicon Valley? The TV series?
I've tried to avoid it.
Have you?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I've tried to avoid it. I hear it's quite good though.
Well, it's very very entertaining. So why have you tried to avoid it?
Well, I suppose I don't know. I don't think TV series can really. If what you're looking for is what is Silicon Valley like, I don't think a TV series can do it. If what you're looking for is some interesting comedy entertainment, then it's a different thing. But Silicon Valley and the investment environment there is a very unique place, and in some ways it's fun and interesting, and the mere fact that you can start a company and get funded on a whim is incredibly positive. And there really is only one place in the world that really does that effectively. But it's also a very harsh environment, and if your company does not do well, venture capitalists have very clever ways of screwing with you to make sure that they get their money back, even if you don't. It's not the kind of benign environment that you think of from these big companies. You've got to be very much on your toes in terms of how you're dealing with them. And so I think of it not as an entertainment program, but as a sort of a collection of businesses that you have to deal with in order to get to do what you want to do, right? So maybe I should watch it, I don't know, but
do you have any words of advice for anybody who wants to go to Silicon Valley to raise investment or to try and build a startup?
Well, yeah. So I should probably say also that when I left TiVo, I got really interested in the startup and investment environment here in Scotland. And I came over and I'm an advisor with Pentec, who you probably know is a venture capital firm here in Edinburgh. And I talked to Scottish Enterprise. I just wanted to find out what was going on. And through Pentec, I got to meet a lot of startup companies who would come and pitch them, and realized that it's really different here. The amount of capital available is not so great. I think companies sometimes suffer here in Scotland because they're undercapitalized. You run out of money, and you could do more if you just had more money. And the VCs say, well, I'll give you £200,000 when you actually need $2 million. And so I learned a lot from that. I also learned that a lot of these companies said, oh, we got to get over to Silicon Valley, and we got to go to Sand Hill Road, and we got to convince those investors to give us money, right? And it's hard because they're very parochial. It's very difficult for a company from the UK or from any other country to come in, and when they're not known, to convince investors to put money in. We were lucky because we knew those people. They knew us. They knew what we had done. And so we'd kind of crossed that barrier. We had to convince them that this was a good idea. So my advice is, if you're just starting up, don't go there. you're going to waste a lot of money unless you know people there, unless you've got connections there, unless you have confidence that you're going to get a good reception. There seems to be enough investment activity here in the UK to start from that standpoint, and then move out from there.
Okay.
And I think, as you know, there are some US-based venture capitalists that have offices here that can maybe be that bridge from one to the other.
Yeah.
But it's not an environment you want to just walk into expecting that it's going to yield results for you.
Yeah. So our last speaker was Rob Jones from FanDuel.
Yeah.
And Pentech invested in FanDuel, and you're on the board of FanDuel, and you know Nigel Eccles really well.
Yeah.
Did you? I know Nigel. I think he pitched to something like 80 VCs when he was trying to raise money. Is that for the? I guess you're saying that we really shouldn't follow in Nigel's footsteps necessarily, but.
Well, he did that. I think he did. I don't know all the ins and outs of the company, but he did that once they had become established.
Oh, okay.
Right. So the raw startup. They changed their ideas several times, but as a raw startup, they got going on grants from Scottish Enterprise. They got going on a modest amount of funds from Pentech and others, and bootstrapped themselves out from there. And it wasn't until they really got established that I think they were able to attract money from the US. And it was in a space that I think investors felt was hot. The whole fantasy sports space is a really interesting space to be in, and it had its own set of controversies. But they were quite far along before they raised the big bucks.
What do you like to do these days? Are you still thinking of startups? Are you more advisory or investing, or?
I'm on a no. My peak. I was once I left TiVo. I did actually join the venture capital community as a venture partner with two separate venture firms, and spent several years with them. And through that process, ended up on the board of about half a dozen startup companies, doing all sorts of different things, all in the tech space. And I was really interested. I learned a lot about. My career had been on the other side of the fence, right, which is trying to get money, and it was really interesting to be in a situation where you wanted to give money, but just to the right people, and seeing both sides of the coin was very eye-opening for me. I did. My ex-partner at TiVo and I did a small company, an additional company after that, but it was we never really tried to make it something big. It was just, we liked this sort of entrepreneurial thing, and we had friends that wanted to work with us. Today I'm retired. I'm trying to avoid tech personally, so the boards I'm on these days are all not-for-profit boards, and that kind of thing. But I still have a keen interest in what's going on. I still follow the activities in companies, and I'm very much continue to be very passionate about this idea of young entrepreneurs, well, not necessarily young, but just entrepreneurs who have a passion for what they want to do and are willing to sacrifice and give up a lot to make it happen. Because I think when you can do that, at least for me, it was absolutely the most satisfying thing you could ever do, ever. and when you can hit that zone, when you feel like you've got something important to do, and you're able to make it happen, and you're committed, you've committed yourself personally to make it happen, that can be a hugely satisfying thing. Now, having said that, of all these things that I've done, all the VCs that I've talked to, all the boards that I've been on, and all the other, both here as well as in the US, 90% of them fail. And one of the things I noticed was that when a company in the US fails, when a startup fails, it's almost a rite of passage. It's almost a badge of honor, right? When we see companies, people come in to pitch to a partner meeting, and so would say, well, I think you should look at this company. They're very interesting. They're really smart people. They've got a good idea. They've tried this company and that company and that company, and they've all kind of failed. So they have this incredible experience. Right?
They've not given up.
They've not given up. They are committed, and they've learned a huge amount along the way. So we should listen to them, right? Because they rate. Okay. Here, I notice, it may not be universal, but just in my own experience, here it's like, that company failed, we're not going to touch them again, okay? And that may be a little extreme, but there is a different attitude that I've noticed. And so you have to kind of get yourself through that. It just means that you have to have a more commitment, more passion, more desire to do what you want to do. The other thing I learned about was a lot of companies try to start up because they've got a good idea. You'll come in and go, I've got this great idea, and I want to tell you about my great idea. It's a new and unusual thing. And that to me is a big red flag, because it's not about the idea, it's about the problem you're solving. Okay? And so when a company comes in, when a group of individuals come in and say, I've identified this problem, this issue, right, that people have, or companies have, or businesses have, that is holding them back, is causing productivity issues or people issues or whatever, and I want to solve that problem, and I have a way to solve that problem, then that gets attention. Okay, so in the case of TiVo, it was not, hey, we had a great idea to use a computer disk to record TV programs so you could pause live TV. That was not the selling point. The selling point was, guess what? People have very busy lives. They get frustrated that their favorite programs are on when, they're having dinner, they're out traveling, kids are doing their homework. They have a life, right? And if you have a life and you want to see your favorite program, you want to solve that problem. And that was our solution to that problem. And that's what triggered, not the idea that we had done something technically difficult to record TV programs on a disc. So I think it's really important that you talk about the problem you're solving or the benefit that you're creating, rather than the cleverness of the idea that you're having, right?
So now we have a new problem with binge watching whole series of our shows.
Is that a problem?
For some people it is, yeah. Okay, so I think we're going to open it up now to questions. So please, let's just thank Mike for his honesty. So does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Mike? Okay, two at the end here.
Hi. So I would like to ask you, because you have spent time in Silicon Valley, where do you think the future lies? Do you think Silicon Valley is still doing now what they were doing a couple of years ago, or is the future shifting more towards the east, as everyone is predicting?
So I'll just repeat the question.
Yeah.
So is Silicon Valley still doing what they used to do, or is it?
Where's the future, basically?
Where's the future?
Silicon Valley or the east?
Well, I think it's going to spread, for sure, no question. And in Asia, there's clearly a lot of activity. But Silicon Valley has some unique properties that I think they're there for the long term, right? They've built this infrastructure where, they can generate huge amounts of capital for investment. That's institutionalized, not just in Silicon Valley, but through the limited partners that actually bring the money in. They also have significant tax advantages, where profits can be treated as capital gains versus ordinary income. That makes it very attractive to invest. They build a culture around failure. Actually, when you think about it, if 90% of companies fail, you have to have the a culture that says that's okay because 1 in 10 or 1 in 100 are gonna take off, and that's not something you can just sort of say let's do that, right? And they have a history of return. You know, one of the issues I think that the UK has faced in venture funding is the history of return is not great, right? I think it's definitely improving. Like Pentec's second fund, I think has been quite successful. Pentec's first fund was not, right? And they battled against getting people to put money into those funds because they didn't think they were going to get a return. So all of these things build up over time, right? And they're sustainable. So I think that, and then the other thing you've got there that's critically important is educational institutions that generate very smart people who are motivated to be entrepreneurs, right? Stanford University, Berkeley, those places are just feeders for that. I give a talk every year at Stanford to a group of people from the business school who are all clearly motivated to do their own companies, and they're keen to hear from people who have done that, and they get access to them. They don't only get access to entrepreneurs, they get access to professors who have been entrepreneurs, and you know, so it's a multi-dimensional thing that isn't going to happen overnight anywhere else, but it will gradually spread out, and that's a good thing. I think it'd be a great thing.
Yeah. So Selby had a question.
Mike, thank you very much for your talk, by the way. All absolutely fantastic and very interesting. It seems you've had a very long journey, but you've got there in the end. All different companies you work for. I'm currently the co-founder and CEO of a company called Convergent Technologies. We build a new hardware platform technology. And my question is more about how the landscape's changed. How the landscape's changed over the last couple of years. You spoke about how when you first started, it was all about hardware.
Yeah.
And then after the invention of the microprocessor by Intel, it's changed the software. Do you think there's still a future for small startup hardware companies?
So how's the landscape changed? Is there still a future for small hardware companies?
Oh yeah, absolutely, no question. You know, hardware, you probably know better than I do now, but to me a lot of hardware is software, right? Mm-hmm. You know, you sit down and you program it all up and you hit a button and a chip shows up, right? But I think there's equally as much innovation that can go on in hardware as there is in software. If the only issue might be is it may be more capital intensive, right? I mean, even when we did TiVo, that was an environment where the biggest criticism we got was it's hardware, right? You know, you can't make any money on hardware. Your margins are 5%. You're a consumer electronics company. Consumer electronics companies don't make any money. And so why should we invest in you? And by the way, their valuations are 1x revenue, right? Whereas a software company has valuations of 10 or 20 or 50x revenue. So, but we did some hardware, and people liked it. So I'm still a bit, given maybe it's my background has biased me, but I'm still a fan of that. The company that did the chips for Apple and the small, what's the ARM. That was a UK-based company out of here, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah.
Out of Wilson. Yeah. So there you go. Do one of them.
So we have a question inside of the room.
Hi Mike. I've read a book called Start With Why by Simon Sinek, and he actually mentioned TiVo a couple of times, and it was in a way of the marketing message that you guys put out there as a company, and he compared you to Apple. So my question was, on a personal level, that image that you have in your head, did that company actually kind of succeed in your head or not, like on a personal level?
So I'll just repeat the question for the other side of the room. So Simon Sinek mentions TiVo in the Start With Why TED Talk, and does Mike think that the company TiVo succeeded in a purposeful way?
So I think your question centers around brand, right? And what brand is, and how effective can brand be in the success of a company? Is that sorry, what? Yeah. So I learned, the companies I'd worked with before TiVo, the concept of brand and marketing was more to do with the quality of the product. I mean, tech and cleverness and all that sort of stuff. When we got to TiVo, it was more of a consumer product. So we had to think about who do you want to be. A brand is not about what you do. Brand is about who you are, right? And so we had to decide who we wanted to be as a company. And we said that we would like to be a company that is incredibly friendly to the consumer. The consumer is our customer. In fact, we banned the word consumer. I hate to even use it. We banned the word consumer because that's just such an abstract term. It's like people. People are our customers, and therefore we had to present ourselves in a way that they felt good about us, that we were their friend, right? And it wasn't just adults, it was kids, it was the entire spectrum of people that like to watch television. So when they watch television, we wanted them to think, TiVo, we've got to have one of them, right? Because that makes it better. And so we set out very much with that as a focus. That was very deliberate. And it was not, the original name of the company was not TiVo. It was a different name, and it was not that consumer friendly. And so we went through a process of trying to define a name for the company. We hired a very talented individual who helped us through that process. We got down to about 6 names, and everybody's looking at me, going, all right, which one do you want to have? And the thing I liked about the name was the character, this animated character that we have that jiggled around on the TV, and it just, I felt that we could do so much with that, and it just was for me the manifestation of that idea that we wanted to be friendly to TV watchers, and we stuck with that. The message changed quite a bit. It started with thinking that it was people who watch TV 8 hours a day, right? And which is some average number that is crazy. I don't know how. We surveyed that, and we found out that for most of the time it's what they call paid programming, which is these commercials that go on at 2 o'clock in the morning because people fall asleep in front of the TV, and that's how the 8 hours are made up. But we realized it was not for people who were just 8-hour TV watchers, but it was for people who, as I mentioned earlier, had a life and wanted to do other things. TV was not their main thing. It was the other things that they were doing, and they wanted to be in control over that TV viewing, whether they controlled how their kids watched TV, or just the programs they wanted, or they just didn't want to miss various programs. And that reinforced that. And then our marketing people got us in front of all sorts of, we were on these talk show hosts, and we'd do these events for celebrities, and built up sort of this aura around what we were doing that was, again, reinforcing that idea. And you end up with a brand after all of that. Yeah.
So TiVo had a really, really good why, I would say, for enable people to watch TV who had a life. So we're going to have to end questions there because it's approaching 7:30, but there'll be a chance for you to ask your question personally of Mike. But Mike does need to leave soon, so please join me again in thanking Mike for his time.
Thank you.